Before General George S. Patton said a single word, every man in the headquarters building knew something was terribly wrong. It was late afternoon in the summer of 1944. The air inside the U.S. Third Army headquarters in Nufto felt heavy, with cigarette smoke, sweat, and tension. Telephones rang without pause. Staff officers moved in and out carrying maps marked with red and blue grease pencil. Outside, trucks rattled across the gravel yard. The war in Europe was moving fast, and Patton was pushing his men harder than almost any commander in the American Army.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
Then word spread down the corridor that Patton had ordered a white officer to report to his office immediately. No one knew exactly what had happened, but they knew who had filed the complaint. A black lieutenant. That fact alone was enough to stop conversations in mid-sentence. In 1944, the United States Army was still segregated. Black soldiers trained in separate units. They slept in separate barracks. They often ate in separate mess halls. Many white officers believed black men should serve only as drivers, laborers, and supply troops. Even when black soldiers earned officer commissions, some white servicemen refused to accept their authority. But the gold bars on a lieutenant's collar were not symbols of opinion. They were symbols of rank. And to George Patton, rank was sacred. The officer waiting outside Patton's door knew that better than anyone. Hours earlier, he had made a decision that seemed small at the time. A split-second act. A deliberate refusal to raise his hand in salute to a black lieutenant who outranked him. Now that single gesture was about to collide with one of the most feared generals in the American military. And within minutes, Patton would make a decision that sent a message far beyond one headquarters building in France. To understand why this moment mattered, you have to go back several years to the beginning of a difficult and often humiliating journey for black Americans who wanted to become officers. In the early years of World War II, the U.S. Army was expanding at extraordinary speed. Millions of men were drafted and trained for service, yet opportunity was far from equal. Black Americans were expected to serve, but many leaders still doubted their ability to command. That belief was deeply rooted in prejudice, not evidence. One of the few places where black officer candidates could prove themselves was Fort Des Moines Provisional Army Officer Training School. During both world wars, it became a gateway for African American men seeking commissions. The standards were strict. Candidates studied tactics, military law, leadership, weapons, and drill. They were expected to meet the same professional requirements as any other officer. Many did. Men who graduated from programs like this emerged wearing the same insignia as their white counterparts. Their bars were earned through discipline, study, and performance. Yet outside the classroom, reality remained harsh. A black lieutenant could hold legal authority over white enlisted men and even junior officers. But that authority was not always respected. Some ignored orders. Some used racial slurs. Others withheld the basic courtesies required by military custom. Among those customs, none was more visible than the salute. To civilians, a salute may seem simple, but in the military it carries deep meaning. It is not about personal affection. It is not a reward for friendship. It is a formal acknowledgement of rank and duty. When a junior officer salutes a senior officer, he is recognizing the authority of the United States itself. That was exactly why Patton cared so deeply about it. George Patton had spent his life immersed in military tradition. Born in 1885 in San Gabriel, he grew up studying warfare and admiring soldiers. He attended United States Military Academy and built a reputation for fierce discipline. Uniforms had to be immaculate. Boots had to shine. Helmets had to sit correctly. Orders were to be obeyed immediately. Many considered him difficult. Some considered him brilliant. Most considered him intimidating. But everyone understood one rule. Patton worshipped military professionalism. He could tolerate mistakes made in battle. He could not tolerate disrespect for rank. As the Allied armies broke out from Normandy in the summer of 1944, Patton's Third Army raced across France. His headquarters was a place of relentless movement. Staff officers worked around the clock coordinating fuel, artillery, armor, and infantry. Every hour mattered. Yet even amid one of history's largest military campaigns, Patton still paid attention to matters of discipline. That was why the incident reached him so quickly. The black lieutenant at the center of the story had been attached to headquarters duties. Sources differ on the precise details, and over time the story has been retold in many forms, but the core account remains consistent. The lieutenant, fully commissioned and wearing the insignia of his rank, encountered a white officer junior to him. The white officer saw the lieutenant. He recognized the bars on his collar, and he deliberately did not salute. This was no accident, no missed glance, no distraction. It was a refusal. For a moment, the hallway fell into an uncomfortable silence. The insult was obvious to anyone who understood Army customs. The lieutenant had every right to report the incident. That decision was not easy. In segregated America, speaking up against racial discrimination often brought retaliation. Careers could stall. Reputations could be damaged. Complaints could disappear into paperwork. But this lieutenant had earned his commission. His rank was real. His duty was real. He filed a formal report. The complaint moved through the chain of command and reached Patton's headquarters. When Patton read it, he did not dismiss it as a personal dispute. He saw something far more serious. To Patton, an officer had refused to recognize lawful authority. Race was part of the incident, but the military issue was crystal clear. A subordinate officer had openly violated the rules governing discipline and command. That struck at the heart of the Army. Patton ordered the officer to report at once. The wait outside the office must have felt endless. The white officer had likely expected little more than a warning, perhaps a stern conversation. After all, the Army of the 1940s reflected the racial attitudes of the broader country. Many white servicemen assumed their prejudice would be tolerated, but they did not fully understand Patton. Inside the office, the general stood beside a desk covered with maps and situation reports. His riding crop rested nearby. His ivory-handled pistols were close at hand, as they often were. Patton was known for dramatic presence, but his anger did not require theatrics. When he was displeased, the atmosphere alone could make seasoned officers tremble. The accused officer entered and reported. Patton wasted no time. He demanded to know whether the complaint was true. The officer admitted he had not saluted the black lieutenant. At that moment, the issue became undeniable. According to the most widely repeated version of the story, Patton erupted. He made it clear that the lieutenant's race was irrelevant. The man was a commissioned officer of the United States Army. His rank required respect from all subordinates. Then Patton issued a direct and unforgettable warning. If the officer ever again refused to salute a superior because of race, Patton would have him court-martialed and driven out of the Army. The words hit with the force of artillery. This was not a polite suggestion. It was a career-ending threat from one of the most powerful field commanders in Europe. The officer understood immediately. In Patton's view, there was no ambiguity. An officer's bars outranked prejudice. News spread quickly through headquarters and surrounding units. Army camps were environments where stories traveled faster than official memoranda. Drivers, clerks, signalmen, and aides passed along every detail they could confirm. Patton had sided with the black lieutenant. For many black servicemen, that message carried extraordinary weight. Their daily experience often included insults, segregation, and doubt. They were expected to serve their country while being denied full equality within it. To hear that a 4-star general had enforced a black officer's authority sent a rare and powerful signal. The Army might be segregated. But rank still mattered. This did not mean Patton was free of the racial assumptions common in his era. Like many historical figures, he was complex and sometimes contradictory. Some of his private comments reflected stereotypes that are troubling to read today. Yet leadership is often measured by actions taken in decisive moments. In this case, Patton chose military law over racial bias. That choice mattered. The incident also highlighted a larger wartime transformation. By 1944, pressure was growing to expand the role of black servicemen. Organizations such as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People pushed for equal treatment. Black newspapers documented discrimination and celebrated military achievements. Families back home followed every development closely. The struggle was known as the Double V campaign, victory against fascism abroad and victory against discrimination at home. Black officers stood at the center of that struggle. They wore the uniform of the United States. They led troops. They accepted the same risks as any officer. Yet they were forced to defend not only against enemy armies, but against prejudice within their own ranks. The refusal to salute was not merely a breach of etiquette. It was an attempt to deny legitimacy. Patton's response restored that legitimacy in unmistakable terms. Other black officers faced similar challenges throughout the war. At Tuskegee Army Airfield, the pilots, later known as the Tuskegee Airmen, proved their skill in combat despite persistent skepticism. The 761st Tank Battalion, nicknamed the Black Panthers, fought under Patton's Third Army and earned a formidable combat record. Patton initially had doubts about some black combat units, reflecting widespread assumptions of the time. But battlefield performance changed minds. Once units demonstrated discipline and effectiveness, Patton used them aggressively. The 761st entered combat in November 1944 and fought across France, Belgium, and Germany. Their tankers endured freezing weather, minefields, artillery barrages, and close-range armored battles. They served for 183 consecutive days in combat. Their courage was undeniable. The same principle that guided Patton in the salute incident applied on the battlefield. What mattered most to him was whether soldiers and officers performed their duties. If they did, they deserved the authority and respect their positions required. For the black lieutenant, the consequences of Patton's intervention were deeply personal. One moment he had been publicly slighted. The next, the commanding general of one of America's most famous armies had affirmed his status beyond question. You can imagine what that meant. The weight of years spent overcoming barriers, the discipline required to earn a commission, the humiliation of being ignored because of skin color. Then, suddenly, a 4-star general making it clear that the United States Army recognized his authority, not as a favor, as a right. For the white officer, the lesson was equally clear. Military service did not erase prejudice overnight. But in Patton's headquarters, prejudice would not excuse insubordination. That distinction mattered to every observer. The story survived because it captured a rare moment when institutional authority was used to confront discrimination directly. It did not end segregation. It did not solve the injustices black servicemen faced, but it demonstrated that one powerful commander was willing, at least in this instance, to enforce the rules without compromise. As the war continued, black soldiers and officers kept proving themselves in every theater. They drove supply convoys through dangerous territory, operated anti-aircraft guns, flew bomber escorts, served as engineers, medics, and tankers. Many earned decorations for valor. Their service helped lay the foundation for change after the war. In 1948, President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981, directing the desegregation of the armed forces. The order did not appear in a vacuum. It was shaped by years of pressure, sacrifice, and documented examples showing that black Americans had served with distinction. Stories like this one became part of that larger history. They showed that competence and courage had always existed. The barriers were social, not military. Historians continue to examine Patton with both admiration and criticism. He was brilliant, demanding, controversial, and often contradictory. He inspired fierce loyalty and sharp debate. His legacy includes tactical successes, harsh methods, and personal flaws. Yet some moments reveal a leader's core priorities more clearly than any speech. This was one of them. At a time when many institutions bent to prejudice, Patton defended the authority of a black officer because he believed the Army could not function otherwise. The salute was not about courtesy. It was about command, and command could not depend on race. Imagine the scene after the meeting ended. The white officer leaves the office pale and shaken. Clerks glance up from typewriters. A captain pretends to study a map while listening carefully. Outside, engines idle in the courtyard. Somewhere, artillery rumbles in the distance as the war presses on. But inside that headquarters, something important has changed. A black lieutenant now knows that the highest-ranking officer in the building has backed him. Not quietly, not reluctantly, completely. That knowledge could steady a man for months, perhaps years. The story also reminds us that history often turns on moments that seem small. No battle map records the incident, no tank advanced because of it, no territory changed hands, yet the consequences were real. An act of disrespect was challenged. Authority was affirmed. A principle was enforced. For viewers today, the power of this story lies in its simplicity. One officer refused to salute because he believed race mattered more than rank. Patton responded by making clear that in his army, rank came first. The lesson traveled far beyond that room. It reached black officers struggling to maintain dignity. It reached white officers who assumed prejudice would go unpunished. And it reached the broader history of a nation fighting for freedom overseas while confronting inequality within its own institutions. The irony was impossible to ignore. American soldiers were battling World War II in the name of liberty. Yet many black servicemen still faced discrimination from fellow Americans. That contradiction did not disappear overnight. But moments like this exposed it. They forced the Army, one decision at a time, to live more closely by its own rules. By the end of the war, hundreds of thousands of black Americans had served in uniform. Their contributions were too substantial to deny. Veterans returned home, determined to claim the rights they had defended abroad. Many became leaders in the modern civil rights movement. Their stories were built from both grand victories and intimate acts of recognition. A salute, a complaint, a commander's decision. General George Patton was not known for softness. He was known for speed, aggression, and discipline. Yet in this case, his most important weapon was neither tank nor artillery. It was authority. He used it to state a simple truth. A lieutenant is a lieutenant. The color of his skin does not alter the bars on his collar, and any officer who refused to recognize that would answer directly to the commander of the Third Army. That is what Patton did when a white officer refused to salute a black lieutenant. In a world divided by prejudice, he drew a hard line. Not because the issue was politically convenient, not because public opinion demanded it, but because, in his understanding of the Army, discipline could not survive if rank depended on race. The war moved on. Armies crossed borders. Cities fell. New battles consumed the attention of millions. Yet somewhere in the memories of the men who witnessed that day, one moment remained sharply clear. A black lieutenant stood on his rights as an officer. A white subordinate tested the limits of discrimination, and George Patton made sure the entire Army understood which one had the authority.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.